It's December 9. Ukraine Media Center continues its operation. My name is Svetlana Shapraka, and now we will discuss the condition of our power grid after the enemy's attacks and the restoration of the Ukrainian energy facilities. Joining us in our studio is Oleksandr Kharchenko, Director of the Energy Industry Research Center. Good afternoon, Mr. Oleksandr. Good afternoon. So what is the condition of our power grid for the time being in terms of generation and transportation and distribution? Well, generally, the situation is complicated. What happened recently was a number of waves of attacks on generation facilities and aerial lines supported by drone attacks on distribution network. In fact, a lot of thermal generation was affected. It's easier to count what is still in operation rather than what's out of operation, and to restore the generation we will need time, significant time. We're talking more months here rather than weeks. Talking about aerial networks, we are in phase one of the restoration. There were two waves of attacks, quite significant ones, quite intense ones, but we're confident that where there is physical protection, the situation is way better. Unfortunately, this physical protection is not present everywhere. There are significant losses of equipment, specifically in those facilities that were not equipped with any protective equipment, and it resulted in substantial losses of transportation. But again, even in case of intense attacks, the physical protection doesn't protect all of the elements of the substations. They only protect the most valuable equipment, the most significant equipment, and the secondary equipment, which is easier to restore. Still, it takes time to restore. And now when there are cluster munitions used on a wider scale in order to enter the territory for restoration and reconstruction, there are a couple of days needed for demining, and then after the power technicians get access to the facilities, it takes them at least 3-4 days to repair everything. So after every attack, 3-4-5 days, the situation continues being complicated when it comes to both transportation and generation of electric power. We are currently in the middle of this cycle, and hopefully within the last couple of days the weather will be the same, and in 3 or 4 days the most part of Ukraine will find the situation improving. But in order to restore it to a normal condition, it may take 12 to 16 weeks from the point where we are currently at. And secondly, in case the temperatures fall, even if we restore the aerial lines, there still will be certain deficit. A lot of thermal generation was destroyed that is hardly to be reconstructed within 3 or 4 months to come. The situation may change definitely, but for the time being it's like that. Another matter is the distribution networks, and there is a number of problems related to them. First of which is the strikes on their distribution networks in the frontline regions. Chernihiv and Sumy region are significantly affected. There's a lot of power shutdowns, emergency power shutdowns in Dnipropetrovsk region that are related to enemy's attacks. And now there is another factor coming into play, which is the degradation of power grid. We've discussed it at your platform a lot of times, and it was said that we would be about to start feeling it, and now is the moment when we start feeling it. The brightest example is the situation in Kyiv, when a high voltage substation was damaged, and after it was reconnected after 4 or 5 hours, it resulted in cascade emergencies in lower level substations. And when they were restored, which had taken about a day, the cables were physically burning in substations in other districts of Kyiv. So that was a cascade emergency, cascade accident, and we should be prepared that such things may repeat in future. There are no ways to avoid such a situation. So basically the system is under control, but we are still in a difficult situation, and as we're currently talking, we are in the most difficult phase of this restoration. It's stage 1, phase 1, when the resources are quite limited. Is the amount of equipment sufficient for restoration? Are we procuring any new equipment? Do we have enough resources? Well, it's difficult to answer this question because currently we're exhausting those resources that were accumulated earlier, and they are, the reserves of auto transformers are falling dramatically. The reserves of equipment for distribution networks almost do not exist. They were not so numerous before, but they almost don't exist now. So I'm seeing no resources and sources for funding for massive restoration of reserves. Well, I may not be aware of some things. I would be happy to find that out, but I can see no resources on part of distribution companies, neither on the part of Ukrenergo, nor on the part of generating facilities. So Ukrenergo still have something, but for the others, the situation is such that after some short time, after 2 or 3 attacks, they will just be looking at the damaged facilities without understanding how to restore it. Well, December is relatively warm. The temperature doesn't fall below 0, but in case the temperatures do fall below 0, what should we expect? It will be objectively more difficult if or when the temperature falls down to -5, -7, -10. Naturally, the consumption is growing. There's nothing to cover it with, and transportation of electric power will be impossible under such conditions. In case of any pause, the transportation arteries, the high voltage substations will be restored, and the majority of the distribution networks, one way or another, will get power supply. Talking about generation, we won't be able to restore the generation within weeks. It's just physically impossible. Certain fraction may be restored, however, we will definitely have deficit. And look, in future, it all depends on whether there will be new attacks. In case there will be no attacks, -5, -10 will mean like 1.5 Qs. In case the attacks continue, it's just impossible to forecast anything. Do we resort to import of electric power? Yes, the import is going on, but it will be of no help because of the damage of the networks inside of the country. We just cannot push that import to the left bank. So there are regions to which we cannot push this electricity. It's a sorrow, but that's a reality. The attacks are taking place every 2 to 3 weeks. Well, recently we were talking about the attacks of the Ukrainian armed forces on the Russian power grid, and you've mentioned that there are chances to leave the southwestern regions without electric power supply. But what is the situation? Is the situation deteriorating over there? Well, I can see no such information from the open sources. I can see no attacks on the area lines by our armed forces. Well, maybe our colleagues have any questions? Well, there's another story I wanted to discuss. Now there is another intense problem growing. It's called we have heating in the system, but we don't have heating at homes when the power shutdowns are pretty long. Let's take some example of a district of Kyiv, like 2 days without electric power supply, which means that the hot water circulating inside the system, it doesn't go up to the upper floors of the building, which means there are pumps either on the top floor of the buildings or in the boiler room. And if those pumps don't have reserve power supply, the hot water just doesn't come to the buildings. In practice, it means that the buildings will not freeze even in case of freezing temperatures, but it will be absolutely uncomfortable to stay there. Currently, it will be like 15, 16, 17, maybe 18 degrees but inside of the apartments. But in case the temperature falls below 0, then there will be a threat of people just... it's not like the buildings will be freezing, but it will be cold inside their apartments. And the people should take care about any reserve power sources to supply power to those pumps. They don't consume a lot. They are not like super powerful. They are quite economical and energy efficient, specifically when it comes to the new buildings. But if they don't work, the temperature in your apartment will be cold. That's for sure. And Teplocommunenерgo utility company will have nothing to do. They won't be able to help you in your apartment. So the only way, if you don't want to get freezing, like not freezing to death, but just feeling cold at your home in case of long power shutdowns, just get united. There's a lot of different examples when the management companies were installing reserve power sources, but again, such examples account for 10% of the total amount. And then people start feeling cold, they start calling emergency hotlines, saying it's cold inside the apartment, but it's objectively cannot happen. Objectively cannot be happening, because if they don't care about themselves, no one will take care about themselves. Thank you, Mr. Oleksandr, for your advice. Let me remind you, we were talking about restoration of the Ukrainian power grid after the enemy's attacks, and the Ukraine Media Center will continue tomorrow. Keep track of our announcements. Thank you for staying tuned.